Oh, she's
Senator Cruz.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Texas. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you. It's been a fantastic conference. So happy to answer any question you like.
Will you push for a vote, a specific vote on a continuing resolution or any kind of budget bill, specifically to block funding for any Obama executive actions on immigration?
You know, it's a funny thing. President Obama recently has been trying to talk quite a bit about a government shutdown. It's a curious dynamic. It seems the Obama administration has made the decision they want this next election to be a national referendum on amnesty. I think it's a little crazy as we're 66 days out from an election that the president, seeing the world on fire, seeing millions of people out of jobs here at home, that the president thinks the top priority in this country is unilaterally and lawlessly granting amnesty, particularly while we still have 90,000 kids crossing into this country. That is an example of partisan politics run amok. And I think it is very unfortunate. If the president wants this election to be a referendum on amnesty, then I am going to enjoy welcoming Minority Leader Harry Reid back to Washington, because I guarantee you the American people are not interested in a president who thinks the number one priority in this country, rather than dealing with the problems we have, is granting amnesty to millions of people who are here illegally.
Does it work to shut down the government, from your perspective, to block him from
You know, it is a very funny thing. There is one person and one person only talking about a government shutdown, and that is the White House. I understand that they desperately want to change the topic from the manifest failures of the Obama economy, from the millions of people who lost their job and lost their health care because of Obamacare, from the absolute failure to secure the border and the humanitarian crisis the president's lawlessness has created, and from the utter devastation abroad from the failures of the Clinton-Kerry Obama foreign policy. But at the end of the day, it's not going to work. Smoke and mirrors and distracting the American people isn't going to work. We need a president who spends less time at the golf course and actually shows up to work fighting for the American people.
You talked about Obamacare, and you talked about how you want to see it repealed, but we have governors out there who are expanding Medicaid, like Mike Pence in Indiana. What do you say to those governors who engage this kind of system that you seem very much opposed to?
Obamacare is the most disastrous piece of legislation in modern times. You know, 5 years ago when Obamacare was being debated, reasonable people perhaps could have differed over whether it might work. Now, as we've seen the devastation, we've seen millions of people lose their jobs. We've seen millions of people forced into part-time work. We've seen millions of people lose their health insurance, lose their doctors. Today, it is the essence of reasonableness and moderation and pragmatism to acknowledge that Obamacare isn't working and we need to repeal it and start over. It is a mistake to expand Obamacare.
What do you say to governors like Mike Pence who engage expansion?
I would urge any governor not to be complicit in the disaster that is Obamacare. It is hurting the American people. And listen, I understand that there were a lot of folks in Washington who, when the battle last summer and fall did not result in Obamacare being defunded then, wanted to declare complete victory. President Obama very helpfully told everyone, the debate is over now, surrender, go home, give up your rights. But you know, any student of military history knows that most wars, and especially wars of significance, are not typically won in the first skirmish. That battle laid the foundation. I think we're going to see in 2014, in 66 days, a second major step in that battle, which is a transformation in the United States Senate, retiring Harry Reid as Majority Leader. The key to repealing Obamacare lies with the American people. If you look to Washington, it's hopeless. But if you look to the American people, I believe we are going to repeal every word of Obamacare.
Senator, ISIS question. Southern border security is a big concern here in Texas,
Yes.
as you know. But also, as it relates to ISIS, we have a president that says he doesn't have a strategy. Should we find somebody who does?
Absolutely yes. When it comes to the border, it boggles the mind that the president doesn't have time to even visit the border. That he spends all of his time with Democratic Party fat cats raising money. That he goes off to Martha's Vineyards. That it seems, you know, it almost seems like the PGA ought to put him on retainer. But you know, look, I don't know about you, but I've never known anyone that plays that much golf. It's almost like he doesn't have a job, like he's retired or something.
Right.
And it's interesting, the president says, quite rightly, that we're seeing a humanitarian crisis at the border. Now, if it's a humanitarian crisis, a real leader would come and see the crisis. You know, just a few weeks ago, I was down in McAllen, met with the chief of the Border Patrol there. I sat down and met with line agents on the Border Patrol. I asked them the simple question, why is this crisis happening? What's caused it?
Right.
Every single line agent gave the exact same answer. They said they're coming because they believe they'll get amnesty. It's interesting, when people cross the border, you have little boys, little girls being brought over by coyotes, being victimized, being sexually assaulted, being physically assaulted. And they show up sometimes with rags on their back, sometimes with nothing, but they have their papers. And actually right now the Border Patrol is not apprehending them. They seek out anyone in a uniform, stop them, flag them down, and hand them their papers. Why? Because they believe they will get a permiso. It is the promise of amnesty from President Obama that is causing tens of thousands, and next year it's expected to be hundreds of thousands of little boys and little girls to be handed over to violent coyotes and drug cartels and being victimized. And it is not humane, it is not compassionate to continue a system where little boys and little girls are being abused. We need a president at home who responds to the real problems we face, whether it's securing the borders or whether it's the fact that we have the lowest labor force participation since 1978. 92 million Americans are not working right now. And the people who've been hurt the most by the failures of the Obama economy are the most vulnerable among us. They're young people, Hispanics, African Americans, single moms. And then abroad. Abroad, for the president to see a U.S. journalist beheaded by terrorists who are openly mocking America and promising to bring that carnage home to us.
And that is my question, is the ISIS threat on the southern border, are you concerned about it?
Are they here already?
I am gravely concerned about national security threats on the southern and northern border. There is no doubt that terrorists are already present in the United States and are quite aware of our vulnerabilities at the border. You know, we just saw a citizen blogger dressed as Osama bin Laden cross the Rio Grande. Now nobody stopped him.
Wow.
And it suggests to you, gosh, if one person dressed as Osama bin Laden were to cross, how many other Osama bin Ladens could cross?
Senator, have you seen the DPS report about ISIS and the cartels? Have you been briefed about that?
There have been multiple reports about ISIS, about the law enforcement and terrorist threats. And I'll tell you, when you visit on the border with Border Patrol agents, one of the things they talk about is how many more people they're seeing from special interest countries. Right now, one of the most disturbing things we're hearing about what's happening in Iraq with ISIS is there's some 500 people reportedly from the UK fighting alongside ISIS, including apparently the monster who beheaded James Foley. And somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 Americans fighting with ISIS there. Now, presumably those Americans have passports that they can come back here and bring the same terror, the same atrocity home to the United States that is happening there. We need real leadership to stand up and protect this country, and sadly neither President Obama nor Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats are providing any leadership whatsoever.
Every successful candidate who's run for president since FDR has gone through Scranton, Pennsylvania. Do you have Scranton, Pennsylvania in your travel plans?
Well, I appreciate that question. I have not been to Scranton, Pennsylvania. I will tell you this, though. If you look at, let's compare the last presidential election Republicans won, 2004, to the last two, 2008 and 12. I'm a very big believer in examining the numbers and data and metrics. For those of you all from Texas, you'll remember the Senate race we had here. It was a $50 million primary, where we were outspent 3-1, had $35 million in attack ads run against us. When you're being outspent 3-1, you have to run a very data-driven, metric-driven campaign, because every dollar you spend, you got to get 3x bang for the buck. You can't afford to waste a penny. If you examine the numbers of 04 compared to 08 and 12, the biggest difference is not the demographic difference, which is what the media tells you all the time. Look, the demographic difference is significant, and I agree Republicans need to do much better in the minority community. I was proud here in Texas to do much, much better in the Hispanic community than Mitt Romney did. But the biggest difference is not the demographic shift. The biggest difference is the millions of conservatives who showed up and voted in 2004, who stayed home in 2008 and 2012. And they fall largely into two categories. Number one, evangelical Christians. Millions of believers who showed up in 04, who didn't show up in 08 and 12. And number two, going right to your question, the so-called Reagan Democrats. Largely ethnic Catholics up and down the Rust Belt. They tend to be blue-collar union members, gun owners, strong national defense. Scranton, Pennsylvania is right in the heart of the Reagan Democrats. They showed up in 04. They stayed home in 08 and 12. Now, I'll tell you, if you look in the last 50 years, there is only one Republican who has a group of Democrats named after him. Reagan Democrats. If the Washington consultants were right that the way you bring people out is moving to the mushy middle, standing for nothing, blurring your distinction with the Democrats, then you'd see all sorts of Democrats named after some of the losing Republican nominees. How did you get Reagan Democrats? Because President Reagan drew a line in the sand. He said, this race matters. He didn't say, I'm just like Jimmy Carter. He said, this race is about a fundamental choice. President Carter and I have fundamentally different visions for this country. President Carter thinks government is the answer to every need, want, and desire in your life. I think government's the problem. And millions of Americans who had been FDR Democrats became Reagan Democrats because they wanted to do what's written right behind me. They wanted to defend the American dream. I think where we are today is uncannily like the late 1970s. I think 2016 is going to be very much like 1980. And it took Jimmy Carter to give us Ronald Reagan. I think Barack Obama is going to produce new leadership in the Republican Party that brings us back to the principle this country was founded on.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.